Jason Ritter. Jason Ritter. We were having so much conversation before the podcast where I was like, stop talking. This is good. No. Stop talking. Because we just went on this whole like Gen X-y like video game.
Yes, we did.
Remember this? Remember?
Do you remember those times?
Remember those times? Because you said you just started playing video games with your daughter.
Yes, it's very fun.
Ours is 4, so she's not quite there yet, and I cannot wait until we get to that point.
It's very, very fun. And then the key is trying not to use my, 46 years of expertise against her.
Of course.
She gets very frustrated, and she's like, so it's not that I let her win, but I don't go full force. Yeah.
You don't go full arcade mode.
Yes, exactly. Destroy all opponents mode.
We were talking about like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, and I was saying in those days, in the 1900s, you had to just hang out at the arcade and watch a kid play who was better than you to learn the patterns. There was literally no other way to find out how to do that.
Yeah, no internet. I remember I had a friend who was like the Zelda guy, the Legend of Zelda. So you'd be like, I don't have enough hearts, or how do you get the sword? And he'd be like, where are you? You'd be like, I'm kind of by the ferry. And he'd be like, all right, go left, up. Like he had the whole map memorized.
He was your Reddit thread.
Burn that third tree on the, like, oh my gosh, it's a secret to everybody except
was
for
this being on the phone or like
on the phone?
Over?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, but he just knew that much about the game. It was incredible.
But you had to be lucky enough to have a person, by the way, in your town. Because calling long distance was very expensive. It was very difficult to justify to your parents that you needed video game tips in the 80s.
Exactly.
And that's why you have like a $40 phone call.
And not every edition of Nintendo Power Magazine had the games that you were playing.
Exactly.
So
or the exact tips that you needed.
Yes, exactly.
So you'd have to write into Nintendo Power Magazine and hope that in 6 to 14 months, maybe they'd get to your letter.
It was very fun though. It was like a word of mouth thing. Because I remember my cousin was the one who told me how to beat King Hippo, who I thought was just impossible.
Oh, from Punch-Out?
In Punch-Out, yeah. Like, I was like, you can't even get a punch in. He's like, when he goes like this, you go like this.
That was you just gave me like such a flood of nostalgia. Left, body blow. Like that, because those games and those at that time, the sort of the proto era of video games was that they were all pattern based. So if you could just figure out the pattern,
exactly,
then you could just like wail on the game, and be cool for a minute.
Well, and that was the fun of it. Something that initially feels impossible, a million bullets or whatever coming your way, you start to realize the more times you grind at it that okay, so it comes like this in a wave. This spot is safe, and then it's so satisfying to plot out your plan of attack and then execute it.
Yeah, but in those days, you basically had 3 lives to do it, and then you had to have more quarters.
Yes, exactly.
Now, I was a very lucky, spoiled nerd because both sides of my family were in the bowling business, so both sides of my family had bowling centers with very extensive arcades. So if I wasn't bowling or playing chess, I was in the arcade playing video games.
Did they meet in the bowling world at a bowling mixer? I mean, how is like both your dad's family and your mom?
Fair question. Yes. In my mind, it just seems very obvious. My grandfather, his parents were Italian immigrants, and in the early half of the 20th century, he got in the bowling business in like the late 40s, early 50s.
Oh my gosh!
And then just had a bowling center for decades. And then my dad, I don't know if I really want to know the actual details of how they hooked up, but in broad strokes, my dad was bowling in a tournament. He was a very famous bowler, which really meant something in those days.
Yes.
And it still does, but I just mean at the time he was, my dad like famous bowlers were in the upper echelon of top athletes because everyone watched bowling on Saturdays. It was a very popular sport. He met my mom through my grandfather's bowling center, and then I don't really care what happened.
So
but
amazing.
Now here I am. And something. It was I don't know, something gross that I want to know about.
So it wasn't like a West Side Story, like two warring bowling alleys, and
it was like Grease 2. We're going to score tonight. Exactly. We're gonna rock, we're gonna roll, we're gonna pop, we're gonna bowl. Chris's parents are gonna do it behind the pin center. No, I don't know what they did. I don't want to know.
No, that's fine.
But they did, and then my
so
dad
cool,
retired from the PBA and opened a bowling center in Memphis that's still there to this day. That's been there for
amazing.
44 or 5 years or something like that.
And free arcade access for you.
I did have free arcade access, but you, Jason Ritter, did kind of allude to the fact that maybe your dad had an arcade cabinet.
He did. He had one, arcade console thing of Mrs. Pac-Man. Ms. Pac-Man.
Miss Pac-Man. They're not married.
Yeah, exactly. She's not defined. Ms. Pac-Man.
I understand that man is in her last name, but she's not defined by Pac-Man.
Exactly. She's got her own thing going on. But he loved that game, and he had that in garage, and I would just play it all the time. It was the first and only time I ever had access to like a free play where I was just like, so I can do this forever?
Yeah.
They're like, well, you have to go to sleep. And I was like, no, but otherwise.
Please forgive me for just kind of slightly nerding out on the image of John Ritter wailing on a Miss Pac-Man game.
He was so good.
Was he really?
He was so good, and I've learned a lot of his moves. He had a very aggressive playing style, like because he knew how good he was, and he would also do it at pretty fast levels. So anytime I ever play Miss Pac-Man and it's like slowed down, I'm like, what is this?
This isn't the real Miss Pac-Man.
But so he would do it pretty fast, and he would do things like he would wait right under the Energizer dot, and then as the ghost would come down, he would eat the dot and get the ghost at the same time.
Oh, the one fell swoop.
Yeah,
move.
like you thought you were gonna get me. Or he would wait right next to the final dot, and a ghost would be coming, and then he'd just get that final dot, and just Miss Pac-Man would basically be kissing the ghost, but the board would be flashing.
It was the
got
kiss
the
of
last
death.
one. Yeah, exactly.
But
do all sorts of things like that.
See, that's really nice.
Teasing the ghost.
That's really nice to hear, because not all boomer parents really played video games, because they were all pretty fully formed adults by the time the video game revolution hit.
Yeah.
And so I remember my parents were just like they knew I liked games, but they just didn't really.
That was my dad for the most part. Like with Nintendo, he didn't really, but like something about Miss Pac-Man was very satisfying to him.
It was a great game.
It was a great game. It was
a great mod for Pac-Man.
Yep.
And to this day, I still think I never think to play like regular Pac-Man. I would only play like Hyperspeed Miss Pac-Man. Like that was the game.
Exactly. No Claude. We're talking Sue, and you're talking the Orange Ghost.
Now, did you have you introduced Miss Pac-Man to your daughter yet?
I have. In arcades, I've tried to show her, and she thinks it's fun, but she's not as impressed by my moves.
But you know what's kind of like bittersweet, and I mean it's sort of funny but also like beautiful at the same time, is being able to say like, this is something your grandfather taught me. Like this is a game. It's like this multi-generational thing. I think about this a lot, and my wife is in the same boat, and I know you are too, where I have these kind of melancholy moments where I'm like, my dad never met my wife. He never met his granddaughter.
Yeah.
And so any little moments like that, like I want to be able to say, hey, you didn't know this guy, but he was really great. And this was something that he did. It's
so funny, dude, because I remember growing up, my dad would always say to us, like, oh, your granddad would have loved you. And as a kid, you're like, of course, I'm sure. But you don't.
Super level.
Yeah. Why not?
Given.
Why wouldn't he? But I didn't quite, that like the sort of the pain of that statement didn't quite land on me until I found myself saying the same things of just sort of, now that you're here, I don't I wouldn't want to go back to that time, but what a tragedy that these two people that I love so much were not on the planet at the same time.
I just envision one day if I'm trying to show my daughter like the Atari 2600 games, like combat, huh?
Yeah,
these squares are shooting lines at other squares. How fun is that? She'd be like, "What ancient technology is this?
This was fun for you?"
Yeah, you might as well be showing them like Tiddlywinks or some kind of game where you're like, "Look, you play with sticks and string."
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
I know it is exactly like that.
It's digital sticks and string. Is basically
it really is.
It's just basically what it is.
Yeah, well, most of it takes place in your imagination.
Theater of the mind. Where are you going? Where
exactly.
Already lost her.
Oh,
yeah,
my
already
gosh.
lost her. I do think about that sometimes though too, where it's like she'll just kind of turn and the light will just catch her eye, and I just kind of see a glimpse of my dad.
Oh yeah.
Like just it's like, oh, the corner of her eye kind of reminds me.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have a lot of these reflective moments like as a dad now?
Yes. I mean, there are things that I know that I have passed down to her, unfortunate things. Like she and I will stub our toes 99% more times than I've never seen my wife, Melanie, stub her toe. But she stubs her toe all the time. It's like some weird lack of spatial awareness that I think also my dad had, that I'm like, wait, is that, oh my goodness, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with the coding.
And your daughter has these both like working parents who are just doing like really cool stuff at the same time.
It's funny because she's like, she gets upset when one of us has to leave town, and she'll be like, I wish your character would die out.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. She didn't. She wasn't.
She's not. Universe. This one does not.
She's joking.
This one does not speak for the family who still need to afford video games for some young lady. How do you think?
If you want Mario Party Jamboree time,
Dad's got to go dance to the Matlock theme.
Exactly.
Mom's got to go into the woods for the.
Exactly. Eat some people.
It's all for you.
It's all for you.
Eat some people.
Our daughter really enjoys making herself laugh.
Oh, that's great.
Which I love so much. And it's a thing that like a lot of kids have, and then you lose it a lot of the time when you get self-conscious and things like that.
Yeah.
You're worried about what other people thinking, but that direct sort of instant feedback loop of like, that's silly, and I recognize that that's silly, and I can laugh at myself about it, is it's just so special to hear her just in the other room. I'll be like making her breakfast, and I just hear her playing back some video that she just made of herself and just laugh.
That's fantastic. I do often wonder about those times where I can just see it's just like pure joy.
Yes,
there's just pure joy and unironic appreciation of everything.
Yes, exactly.
And I constantly in my head, I'm like, when in our lives does that go away? Is it because obviously as parents, we're going to foster that, but is it social dynamic? Is it society? Is it school where the kids are like, that's not cool?
Yeah.
Because some other kid's kind of a jerk and then like squashes. Like what? I wonder what that is.
I mean, I think for me it was, when I went into that period, it was just like deep, overthinking.
Yeah, well, you're in the right place.
Exactly. And just an extreme self-consciousness. And I think there's like some kind of weird primal instinctual thing of like, don't kick me out of the tribe. So I remember getting like super self-conscious. And also there was a thing that didn't exist before maybe middle school, which was being cool. Like the thing of like being cool. And I was trying to like unlock that for a long time. And I remember when I was a kid, I was all about sort of like maximizing my potential, and I remember like learning how to like walk very fast, like as fast as I could without running, or those are my thumbs in my backpack.
I knew exactly what. I didn't think you were wearing suspenders. Wow.
Learning how to run incredibly quietly like a ninja, you know, like all these like weird things that I was like, okay, so what's the best way to do it? And so I would walk really fast, and I remember in middle school being like, oh, the cool guys are like walking slow. So how do I? And I like practice. I tried to like practice walking slow to be like, guess I'll start hitting the class a little early, so I'm still on time.
Gonna take my time on this one.
Yeah.
Hey.
But then I started to slowly realize that it seemed like being cool was like, if you liked anything, you're out.
Right.
Like if you were excited about anything, or you were
vulnerable in any way,
you're out. Nothing could be good enough for you if you were cool.
Right.
And I tried to do that, and it was like a ill-fitting suit or something. It was just like I felt like Vincent D'Onofrio in Men in Black.
Oh, what a great! Oh yeah, with where the skin's got the bugs.
Just trying to fit in, be human.
Such a great performance, by the way.
Such a great,
like one of the best comedy performances.
It's one of those like Michael Keaton from Beetlejuice or something, where you look back and you go, "Oh my gosh, that's all just an actor making choices." As a kid, I was like, "That's a bug man in a human suit."
And he did the way he did his thing. And I would also submit Steve Martin in All of Me, Lily Tomlin.
Oh my gosh!
Where she takes over half her ghost takes over half his body, and then he's trying to operate himself where she has control of half the body. It's
you fully buy that's what's happening in him.
Maybe this is because I'm a comedian, but I look at these performances, I'm like, these are Oscar worthy, because it is so much harder to do that in a comedic, to make people laugh in a convincing way.
Yeah.
Then, like I feel like that, or like I always think about Eddie Murphy's performance in Bowfinger, which I think is one of the greatest comedy performances, where he's playing two characters, and it's so weirdly like he's kind of all over the place and grounded at the same. The other character's very grounded, and so these are the types of things where I'm like, comedy really kind of gets not as much respect as it should get for the craft.
It really does. And like, you just sort of accept Beetlejuice as this character that's kind of always existed, but then you think of a guy going, what if he talks like, what if he's kind of like a used car salesman?
Yeah.
And it's so amazing and wild, and you just think, during filming, is there any part of Michael Keaton that was like, I hope this works, or did it feel funny and great, or I don't even know?
I think about this constantly, because there are things you can do on a set that makes the crew laugh.
Oh, yes.
And then when you see it, you're like, oh, that didn't really translate. So
yes,
I think about that in terms a lot with like Raising Arizona, which is basically just like live action cartoon. It's like one of the greatest films ever, in my opinion, one of the greatest films ever made. Everyone's performance is, again, so out there but grounded, and I've always wanted to just meet someone. I really want to ask Nicolas Cage, like, what did you think when you're doing this I'll be taking these Huggies. Like, are you thinking like you have to really trust the directors?
Yes,
and like, no, I promise. I know this feels weird in real life, but it's gonna translate. I promise.
I love that.
Have you ever been in that situation where you're giving a performance and you're like, I don't know about this? You're like, oh, it actually turned out okay.
I mean, I think that's mostly how I feel. But I also have had the other thing where I've been like, I love all these performances, and I love all these stories about actors trusting directors and then having it turn out like incredible. And then there have been times where I've seen the final product and go, no, my instincts were right. That I shouldn't have trusted it.
I should have spoken up and said that this was not.
Yes, exactly.
It's funny that actors seem to be like the most celebrated in the business, but you're like, don't they have kind of the least amount of control of anything?
Yeah.
Because they're told where to stand. Obviously, they bring a performance to the table, but they don't control generally the editing, the lighting, the sound, the music, the other performances, the scope of the thing.
It is funny that just this one element of storytelling seems to get the lion's share of attention, just because I guess it's just like, oh, I recognize you from the...
Yeah.
But I always remember like hearing about, Charlie Chaplin and all those guys just, they'd finish a scene and then he'd like help set up lights for the next one. And he's just like, I'm just the one doing this, but we're all like making a movie together.
Yeah.
And
just kind of growing up with a famous dad, and now you and your wife both being very well-known, fantastic performers. Is there any sort of lesson or takeaway that you're like, oh, I learned this, like being the child of a famous parent, so I'm, like how that's affected your parenting for your own child?
Yeah, I think it's affected me a lot. I mean, I also my grandfather and my grandmother were also actors, and so my dad grew up with a well-known father in the 50s or 40s and 50s when he was a kid, and so he had all of this sort of knowledge and understanding and things that he wanted to already change the way he raised us from the way his dad was. One of the things his dad did, which was lovely and amazing, was he would always sign every autograph. His whole thing was like, these are the people who are buying the tickets, and it was a give and take and all of these things. But as his son, my dad sometimes felt like, well, I'm here too. I would, can we hang out a little bit? I'm just waiting for you to do all of this, and you're giving all this attention to all these people. So my dad always really tried to find a balance between being kind and grateful and gracious to people who came up to him, but also sometimes being like, oh, I'm just being a dad today. You know? And for me, I was always like, Dad, what are you doing? Give them what they want.
Sign the thing. Walk slower. It's cooler to walk slower.
Exactly.
You're walking too fast.
Exactly. But in hindsight, it was really nice that he, that we felt like priorities in his life. And so, I have a different thing. My dad, sometimes if he started to sign one, it was a different time. There were less shows.
Yeah.
If you were well known, there was less people, and now there's just a lot of people. So for me, it's never gotten to, I'm not like in the Hard Day's Night,
right,
running down the street.
There he goes.
Yeah, he's not hiding in.
You can catch him. He walks really slow. He's still doing that. I'm not going to let that go. By the way,
please,
I'm going to keep leading. Come on, please. I need my time.
Just one hand on the backpack now.
I'm hanging with the family today. I don't know what this is.
Exactly.
Terrible space work.
But
sorry.
But so and it's funny. I've like every once in a while I'll find an old article of an interview that my dad was doing at the beginning of his career, and a lot of the questions were about his dad, and so watching him sort of navigate that and. I feel like I've learned a lot about it. And I think one of the things that my dad always sort of drilled into us was that this idea of celebrity or being well known is kind of empty at its core.
Mm-hmm.
That it may feel very nice and people, but it can come and it can go, and it's not what will fill you up. It's sort of a byproduct of the thing that he loved doing, and so and there's good things and bad things that come with it. But that fame or celebrity in and of itself was not like a goal to attain. And so when I wanted to be an actor, I think that both my parents were they were very supportive, but I think the question is like, do you want to be an actor, or do you think this is the easiest way to get you can be basically well known without having to learn an instrument or like an art form. Like because if you're chasing something that the rest of the world decides whether they give it to you or not, you might be chasing that forever. But if you are enjoying the thing that you're doing, then there's lots of different ways you can be doing that thing, regardless of the reactions of people around you to fill you up. So.
I love that idea, because it basically, when you have just solely ego pursuits, and to a degree, that's always a little bit of a factor, because we're humans.
Of course.
But if your main goal is an ego pursuit, that is the first thing that's on the chopping block. So if it doesn't work, that's going to be the first thing that goes sideways and gets destroyed. Is if your sense of identity is rooted around your ego, that's what's going to get destroyed first.
That's the key. If you're like, I am only worthy to be alive on this earth if I have a certain number of followers or whatever it would be today, then it's a dangerous game, because it's a fickle world.
I loved that you have become this kind of like TikTok, this weird TikTok sensation, just being your goofiest self, like being what I think is like totally undistilled Jason. When I see you like do ridiculous dances to the Matlock theme, I'm like, I know this just might look like he's just goofing. I think this might be his undistilled soul on display.
That is exactly
the thing that you were trying to hide by being cool when you were young.
Yes.
This is really like a weirdly like authentic window into your soul.
It that's what it feels like. It feels like there's an element that feels finally sort of free. And I would, when I was in high school, I made this little rule for myself where if they would ask for a volunteer for like a dance assembly or something like that in front of the whole school, I would force my hand to shoot up just because I wanted to sort of see what happened. And I knew the worst thing would just be that I would be embarrassed in front of everyone. And I hated that feeling and I liked that feeling, and it was interesting, and I would at least know how I felt on the other side of it. And I remember one time I went up and I did this like really crazy dance, and it felt great. I think part of it was that I had really wonderful friends that I knew loved me that wouldn't be like, whoa, dude, that was so embarrassing what you did. You can't hang out with us anymore.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's a similar thing in my life right now where I feel Melanie's unconditional love, and I'm like, I can do this, I can be this, and you're not going to be like, what are you doing?
Yeah,
that is so embarrassing.
So embarrassing.
Yeah, I'm
on a hit drama. What are you even doing right now? I'm literally on one of the most critically acclaimed, and you're dancing like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
That feeling of having real, true friends and family members and things has allowed me to be myself and know that there will be people who are embarrassed by it and don't like it, and I get those comments sometimes. And then I also think like we probably wouldn't be friends. Like
right.
That's true. That's real me. So if you don't like it, then I'm kind of relieved.
Isn't it weird that we can be affected by random comments or opinions of people that we wouldn't hang out with?
Yes, absolutely.
That you wouldn't, like, if you met that person, you'd be like, oh, that was a little bit of a sour grape. I don't know if I'd want to, but you could still sit at home and go, oh man, like,
yeah.
This person didn't like this, thought my dance. Oh man.
I know. Yeah. So cringe. So nice trying to be your dad or whatever, like anytime I see a comment that is purposefully cruel and designed to like haunt you to your grave, and the ones that are designed to create the maximum pain upon the person who's reading it, I always will go look at their profile or their other comments on other people, and it's so relieving because of exactly what you said, where I just go, oh, this is your whole thing.
Yeah.
This is your whole thing of just like trying to take
and in
people
some
down
senses,
a peg
you
or whatever.
actually feel empathy.
I do.
Like, what happened to make you think that this is how you needed to get attention and validation? Something really sad and bad and painful must have happened, and I'm sorry.
I really do, because I go, wow, you succeeded in making me feel bad. I'm not like a machine, but this is my one moment of interacting with you. But that's your life.
Yeah.
And you haven't learned to find a different way, or, unless that is satisfying to you in some way to hurt people. And, I don't know, but I do. It's a helpful thing to, because when you read a comment from somebody, you can imagine that they're a professor of dance somewhere.
Smoking a pipe, just like very erudite.
Well, I've studied 1 million TikToks, and yours is the worst.
Oh, this person is really an expert.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I always try to lead with love and empathy. And, like it's hard sometimes because, of course, you feel hurt and you feel like that kid in grade school with the other kids going, you're dumb, and you're like, oh my god, I am, you see me,
Yeah.
But part of the getting older and kind of being more secure with who you are is just being able to have that awareness, and I really do love that you've embraced that. And I know you're goofing, but the dances are kind of weirdly good. I'm like, fuck, man, that's really good. It's like funny, but it's and it does I see something like that, and it kind of weirdly inspires me. Like, I need to just let go more and stop crowding with like, oh, should I be there? What is it? It's like just be the most you can be. That's the best you can be.
Absolutely. And I think like that's one of the things that both my parents really were wonderful at, which was creating the space to be your most authentic self. It wasn't like, hey, in order for us to love you, you have to be like this, or you have to do this, or you have to love this, or, these kinds of people, or whatever it is. It was like, who are you? I want to know who you are, and I love you unconditionally, and it can be really powerful. I feel like sometimes in certain circles, people are like, unconditional love is dangerous. You can tell someone that they can do anything, and it's and then the world smacks them down and it's painful. But I also think that unconditional love has the power to make someone try to feel worthy of that love by being their best self and go, wow, they really will be there for me at all times. So how can I live up to that in a certain way? And
sure. And if for some reason it doesn't work out, or it doesn't work for them or whatever, it's like, well, then they weren't right for your orbit. You know what I mean? They can find other people. You can find other people. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Are these types of insights that you've come upon through sobriety and sort of like, because I've had it for a while now, and I find that there are so many things that I just wasn't even ready to understand, 20 some years ago. Like, oh, I still have like, oh, okay, now I understand why I felt this way or that way, or why I had this kind of limiting belief. It's all just kind of a symptom of this thing.
I mean, I think that's the most exciting thing about sobriety or therapy or any kind of like attempt to better yourself, is those moments where it feels like your life is some kind of weird escape room, and you're like, oh, remember how we needed a 3-letter combination? I got it. I found it. It's over here. Put it in. Like next step. It really feels like sort of leveling up in that way.
I've never heard it described that way. I love that so much.
Well, because
the wall just opened up. Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, talking about also like, in Contra or whatever, these impossible bosses that then you learn, okay, they do the bombs and then they do the bullets, and then so you just got to stand here. You start to, once you recognize the pattern, you can stand in the safe place to defeat the big boss.
Life through Contra.
Life through Contra.
I love it. I mean, this is again like, you're seeing what a lot of our psychological training was as like kids of the 80s, like video games. Like, no, is how.
If you go into that boss with the same strategy, which is I'm just going to shoot it as many times as I can and just try to get there, you'll die every time. It's only when you start to stand in certain places, watch the patterns, and take that moment of sort of stillness and quiet to realize, oh, okay, this impossible boss actually has some fatal flaws
what I need to see you start doing is just like through like real deep life philosophy while playing old video games.
I would
just playing Contra or like whatever, and then but at the end you have to end everyone with winners don't use drugs. That always came on the which to me as a kid, when I saw that sign come on at the end, I was like, if I'm seeing this, that means I lost the game, so I'm a loser. Does that mean I go use drugs now? Like, it's just...
Yeah, the messaging was a little bit...
Yeah, I didn't win. How am I a winner?
Yeah, but I like fried eggs. So
yeah, come on. What's the...
If that's my brain on drugs.
So specific.
Am I supposed to eat a raw egg? I thought you were supposed to cook them.
Anyone under the age of like 42 is like, what is he talking about?
Well, for those of you out there, there was a big famous commercial.
This is your brain on drugs.
This is your brain. It was an egg.
Yeah.
And then he put it in a frying pan and went, this is your brain on drugs. And it fries. And he goes, any questions? And it's like, yeah.
A lot. Several. Wait. Several. First of all, eggs are great.
Eggs are great. They're supposed to be good for you. Were you supposed to scrape? Any egg you have to cook somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just, unless you're Rocky.
Yeah, then you just chug it.
Yeah. Anyway, it was
either that or the...
I learned it from watching you.
I learned it from watching you. The dad with the mustache. Yeah. Where did you learn that? And then what's so crazy about that is the dad seeming like, oh wait, like he wouldn't have figured that out before.
Well, because he's high. He's like, oh yeah.
I'm sorry, right? I'm pretty up right now.
Two minutes ago.
I'm really messed up on a lot of stuff.
Oh, these aren't even your drugs. These are mine.
Yeah, exactly. Where did you learn this? There's way better shit you could be doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me grind you some powder, like, or whatever.
Exactly.
Like, those are all like the weird kind of Gen X-y snarky places that my brain would always go when I would see those commercials. Like, come on, I have follow-ups.
My favorite one, the last one was, it was a big smoking cigarettes campaign, and there are these two kind of like, not like super cool guys like walking around, and they see this very beautiful girl. They're all teenagers, and they see her, and she's in like a leather jacket, and they're like, oh my gosh, look at her, she's so beautiful. And then she like takes a cigarette and she lights it, and then there's like a quick like flashes of her coughing and like Large Marge claymation style, and then like turning into a skunk and turning into all these things, and then these two guys are just like, yeah, but she smokes. Like, let's get out. And I loved it so much because it's just so funny that they're like, that's what's keeping us.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you were
her loss.
Like if you were in high school and you were the one who was like, forget it, dudes, she smokes, I'd be like, yeah, and?
Yeah.
Oh, nothing. I was just, I don't know. I was just kind of free associating.
Yeah, and if I didn't smoke, you thought you had a chance? Yeah.
But at least they were trying. You know what I mean?
It's a beautiful thing.
At least like someone was trying to communicate to us in some way, like,
yeah,
this is bad.
I mean, the effective one was Pee Wee Herman saying, don't do crack, I think. Did you ever see that one?
No.
Oh yeah. There's a Paul Rubens anti in Pee Wee.
Do you guys remember this?
No.
I don't know.
Very serious. And he's still doing the voice.
He's still doing the voice, but
yeah, don't do crack, kid. I mean, I can't do it.
That's pretty spot on. that was not bad.
I do love him.
One of the things that I love about your dance videos is that they're just so like, I imagine one take, you put them up, people love them. They make people so happy. And I've had such a hard time with TikTok because my Gen X brain is so tied to like, it's just so programmed to like kids in the hall sketch writing.
Oh yeah.
Oh, my social media videos are always longer than what people watch now. They were appropriate for kids in the hall era.
Right.
But there's a character and it escalates and there has to be a turn and then it has to land somewhere. And it's just like, no, you just need to come on and be like, bah! And then that's the whole video.
I know. I mean, what's so funny is there have been times where I was like stuck somewhere. I had too much time on my hands. Melanie and our daughter are somewhere else, and so I'm just like, I'm gonna make something. And there have been times where I've spent an entire day. There was one I did a TikTok where I did an entire day of trying to figure out how to get this. I basically did a whole Hercule Poirot sketch, and it took so long. And it was also, I don't know what that audience is of like, hey, who knows some little Poirot? You watched all seasons of
Poirot Talk, anyone? Poirot Talk?
Yeah, he always gets them to gather in the foyer. Am I right?
Come on.
But then and so I would work so hard on these things and edit them and cut them together and all these things, and then it would just like no one would watch them, and then it was so weird and funny that the less I thought about something, the more I just did it, the more people were like, what are you doing?
First of all, I have to applaud you for keeping on theme with the podcast.
Yes.
And also, the overthinking thing it feels like this organism in your gut that just wants you to feed it. And the second you start feeding it, it just, it gets bigger and bigger. But the more you can just be like, I'm just going to kind of go with my,
Well, because I remember when I was a teenager, I really wanted to be funny, and I wasn't, but I would collect jokes and then just walk around with these jokes like half cocked in my, arsenal, just
ready to go.
And I remember, speaking of Pee Wee again, there was in his Roxy show, there was a joke that I didn't quite understand. back in the day. But his friend Hammy comes over. Hammy was, I think, not in Pee Wee's Playhouse when it came, but Hammy came over, and Pee Wee says, "Hey, do you have a license to sell hot dogs?" And he goes, "No." And then he points, and Hammy's fly is open, and he zips it up. And I was like, "That's so funny." I didn't even get the main.
Please tell me you went around saying that to people in real life.
First step was I went around looking for unzipped flies, like a little psychopath, just looking for them.
It's for a bit, I swear. It's for a bit.
It's for a bit. And then when that didn't work, I was like, all right, how I gotta say this joke. It's so funny. I was like, I know, I'll walk around with my fly on.
Oh my gosh.
And when people point it out to me, I'll say something like, "I guess I don't have a license to sell hot dogs."
or you actually go down to City Hall and apply for a license.
Actually,
which you can then...
yeah, exactly. I mean, but that level of like, I need to get people to laugh. I have this joke that was told to me, and so I don't even understand it, but I'm going to try to recreate it just to get that like laugh.
That is so, like, that idea is something I so relate to, because I did always feel like I wanted to be the class clown, but I was really more of the eye roll.
Yes, yeah.
Which maybe followed me into adulthood. I'm sure that people have that reaction to me, but
And I wasn't the class clown, but I studied him.
I watched him, and later on, not at the time, but yes, I wanted to be that too. I wanted to be I saw that Pee Wee special from the Roxy, which basically, birthed his, the movie and his show and like blew him up, and saw him on Letterman, like all of those, any kind of weird sort of offbeat, like Emo Phillips, like any of these really
Emo
great
Phillips.
kind of esoteric comics, Stephen Wright, but I loved all comedy, so I wasn't snobby. Like,
me too.
It was observational comedy to weird stuff, and I totally wanted to be that guy in a world when other people I didn't understand did not have the context or interest to understand that. So it was just these weird non sequiturs that people were just like, okay.
Well, and that's the thing, is that I think laughter and people respond to spontaneity, and so that's the magic that stand-up comedians and people have, is they've planned it, they've written these things, but then they do it in a way that feels spontaneous. But as a kid growing up trying to do that, I was too scared to try anything spontaneous. So I would collect these jokes and then just be like, I'm ready. And then people could. There was a Mr. Show sketch that did this so perfectly, where they're in a biosphere and there's Bob Odenkirk and he's like the cool guy, and he's like, "There's a party tonight, everyone come, ladies, pants optional," or something like that, and they all like burst into tears, and David Cross is this weird guy in the biosphere that no one likes, and a full 2 minutes later he goes, "How about the ladies wear no pants?" And everyone is like, and he's like, "Well, because he said," remember when he's trying to do the joke again, I was like, "Oh my God, I know that feeling."
That's the guy.
Well. But he said it. Why?
I don't understand. We worked a couple minutes ago.
But the desperation to be funny, and it was so hard to try to let go of some of that, and just, a jazz musician isn't going, "Oh, what am I going to do for the solo?"
Right.
They eventually just do it. And so we would go see improv and come away going, how did they come up with all that stuff? That's incredible. How do they trust themselves that much?
I do find as I get older of like that skill set of letting go, which I think is a lot of what, kind of existing in sobriety is about, like just the sort of releasing control of the environment and just kind of letting go and being able to be in the moment comfortably. Because I also, in addition to being able to sort of recognize like-minded comedy people, it's like I recognize an overthinker when I see one, and I know that like part of how we self-medicate when we're younger is we just kind of drink to numb it, to just kind of shut it up, you know, and shut it down.
Well, I think walking around so tightly wound as a teenager, the alcohol was what pried reality out of my grasp for a minute. I was able to kind of feel that freedom because I wasn't thinking as much about it. And so, yeah, then the challenge is when you get rid of that, you're Dumbo and his magic feather, where you're like, no, I only can fly if I have that.
Right.
And to be sober and try to find that same kind of freedom is a challenge.
I imagine most people, particularly for comedy and performers, it's like, if I quit drinking, can I still be funny?
Oh, yeah.
And for me, realizing after I'd quit drinking for a while, like, oh, I have much more presence on stage than I had before. I didn't know because I was under the spell of this chemical that was telling me, oh, you're so funny, you're so, but like,
that's the trick.
Maybe I wasn't. And now I have the clarity. And I talk about this a lot, mainly because it's really just for at least one person out there who stumbles across this. They hear something that clicks in their brain and they go, oh my God, that makes sense to me now. I think today is my day. Today is the day that I'm just going to go.
Yeah.
Was it sort of like that for you? Did you have like one day?
For me, I think the way it came about was initially, basically Melanie said, you can absolutely keep drinking, but my boundary is I can't be around you. We won't be able to see each other. And, you know, people had broken up with me before in that period of time, and I was always like, that's the best decision you could possibly make. You're absolutely right. And I hope you find somebody who is worthy of you and wonderful and all that stuff. And with Melanie, there was something about our connection where I couldn't let go. So sometimes, you know, we would get into a discussion or something. I would start to feel my confrontation trigger go, and I would pour a drink, and I would be like, if I take a sip of this and I say, well, I did it, then she's free. She doesn't have to deal with me anymore. I don't know what happens to me, but I'm out. And then I could never do it. And we would always solve the problem together. And that was also a kind of an amazing thing to me, is that we were on the same team trying to solve a problem.
Yeah.
And so I did think privately, I'm going to get sober. And I owe that to you, and I apologize for the pain that I've caused you by running away or not being accountable or coming home and, you know, like not having texted you where I was, or, you know, just like all the things that were really triggering and awful for her. I was like, well, I'll get sober. I felt like I owed that to her. I also felt like I'm going to show you who I really am, and then you're still going to go, yeah, okay, this actually, there's too much wrong with you, and I am done. But at least I will have, like in the Iceman Cometh, the play, this guy comes back and he's like, everyone go follow your dreams and get out of this bar and go follow them. And then they all go follow their dreams, and then one by one they all come back to the bar, and he's like, yeah, that was always the plan. Now you know that your dreams can't come true, and you can drink lonely and miserable without your potential haunting you. Now you're free of your dream. And that was kind of what I thought, like, I will show you the best of me, and then you will go, oh, okay, that's not enough. And
so you're almost trying to sabotage it before that.
Yeah, well, I was really giving it my best shot, but I thought that I was like, I will give you what you think you want, and you will realize that that is not what you want. That something about just me is too much or too crazy or too immature or whatever it is.
Because you didn't love that side of yourself.
Because I didn't love that side of myself, and I just thought, yeah. And so it was only like quite a bit in where I started to feel better about myself, you know, with these months and months and months of not adding to the chaos or the pain or whatever else, just being there and being consistent, where I started to feel like a little bit better about myself. But I was like, oh, but maybe once she leaves me, I won't go back to drinking, because actually this feels much better. Yeah. And so I was able to switch it from not drinking for her to not drinking for myself. I just think initially I didn't really care enough about myself, sadly enough. I just sort of was like,
don't have the clarity when you're still in it.
Yes.
You kind of have to stop, and then exactly what you described, it just takes a bit of time to like clear out those cobwebs.
Yes.
Because you're sort of emotionally arrested from the time you really start drinking
Right.
up until you stop. And
Yeah,
so there's a
exactly.
little bit of catching up to do. You actually have to get to know yourself. You
Yeah.
have to get to know yourself. You have to be friends with yourself. You have to love yourself. You have to not self-sabotage, like all those things. So
Yeah,
I'm just very grateful that you arrived at all that.
I do too. I mean, to me, it really feels like you see a baby bird that fell out of a tree, and then you're like, oh, he's not going to make it. But you know what? I'm going to put it in a shoebox and put it in some tissue paper and just give it little drops of water every day. And you're like, you're not going to have a good life. It's going to be, and then slowly you see it like being okay, and you actually cannot believe it. And you also know that it would not have had this miraculous recovery if you hadn't done something about it.
Am I reading too much into it, or am I, because again, not to take all of the whimsy out of the dance videos, but when I see those, I really genuinely feel like this is Jason accepting himself. This is Jason just being Jason and not caring, not criticizing himself, not worrying about like what people are going to say, how fast he's walking, whatever. And he's just this is just like, is just like a great signifier of like, he's doing well with himself.
That's exactly what it is. And it's not that I still criticize myself all the time.
Sure.
And but it feels so much nicer to just not be worried.
It's so much work to care all the time. It's so much work to be anxious all the time and care all the time.
Yeah.
It really is a tremendous amount of like, it is so exhausting.
Yeah.
And also like one thing that I would tell people, that self-critical voice is not you. It's not who you are. And learning the separation from that is a very big moment of clarity for anyone who's watching this that has this aha moment. Like, it's just a thing your brain does. It's not you.
Right.
You are underneath. You are you. And that's just a script or a program that's running based on whatever it could be, how you grew up, past trauma, whatever, insecurities, whatever it is. But just knowing sometimes like, oh, even just that awareness sometimes is enough to sort of separate from it and be like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I can be okay, because when that happens, I can just go, that's a thing.
Yeah. Well,
I can choose not to listen to it.
It does sort of feel like programming or like, your code. And when you start to look at your patterns or certain things, it almost rewires itself. There's always been like a rebellious streak to me. I remember asking my mom if she could not ask me to do my homework, because every time I would be like about to do my homework, she'd be like, "Are you doing your homework?" And I'd be like,
"Not now."
Can't do it for 2 more hours now, because
I'm gonna do it on Jason's time.
Exactly. It was such a weird, just like reaction of like, I'm not doing it just because you said. But once you realize when this button gets pressed, your arm goes like that.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, it doesn't. And you're like, watch, boop. And then when you realize that, and the ability to snip that connection and rewire it so that button gets pressed, and you go, I can't control who presses that button, but I can control my reaction to it. I don't have to get so angry or so worried or so scared or so upset. I can actually take a moment and go, all right, so that happened. But because I'm not a robot and because I'm a human and I can change, I can rewire the connection.
Well, I so appreciate that you came, and that you came for some goofs and also for some really poignant conversation. I think it's very nice, because again, I do think it just, if the right person is just catching it on the right day, they'll go, oh my God, I love that guy, and he's willing to talk about this stuff, and he went through that. I don't feel so alone. Yeah. Maybe today is my day. So that's, obviously I would love to just sit here and just riff back and forth and just quote old Kids in the Hall sketches and stuff. But I do love that, there's this whole other thing that you're willing to talk about, because I do think it helps people as much as the comedy stuff helps.
I do too. I love the release of comedy, but I also think it's so, I remember several times in my life where I saw someone being honest about something. And I also feel like people can sniff out artifice in a certain way. If I was trying to portray myself as my ideal self and just be like, no, don't worry, there was never any issues. I think I think there's something comforting about the truth.
You know what? It's okay to be a fast walker.
It is okay to be a fast walker. I'm bringing it back.
Do you know where I learned that? I learned that from watching you.
Oh my God.